Today we have a webinar to help complete Task 13 in your Jekyll and Hyde booklet as you read and analyse Extract 6, where Stevenson describes Utterson's dream. The wonderful Mr. Archer produced this PowerPoint and presentation for you, but unfortunately he experienced some technical issues recording this, so I'll be recording it for him. I will try to deepen my voice. Now, we know that Utterson is deeply troubled by Enfield's story of Mr. Hyde trampling a young child. And we also know that he has connected this man to his good friend Dr. Jekyll. He's very concerned about Jekyll's will, which leaves everything to Hyde and allows him to step into Jekyll's shoes if he disappears. He's trying to work out what hold Hyde has over his friend and believes he is being blackmailed. All of these fears now invade Utterson's dreams and nightmares, as we see in the extract. 6 o'clock struck on the bells of the church that was so conveniently near to Mr. Utterson's dwelling, and still he was digging at the problem. Hitherto it had touched him on the intellectual side alone, but now his imagination also was engaged, or rather enslaved. And as he lay and tossed in the gross darkness of the night in the curtained room, Mr. Enfield's tale went by before his mind in a scroll of lighted pictures. He would be aware of the great field of lamps of a nocturnal city, then of the figure of a man walking swiftly, then of a child running from the doctor's, and then these met, and that human juggernaut trod the child down and passed on regardless of her screams. Now, even in this first part of the extract, you can see that Stevenson is describing quite a terrifying nightmare, and Utterson is replaying this nightmare over and over again. From the words that Mr. Archer has highlighted there for you, it shows that he feels enslaved to this dream. He can't escape it. And it just seems to be like a film that replays and replays. And the image that stays in his mind most strongly is that horror of this force that just treads over this child and leaves her screaming, a really horrifying scene for anyone. But then the nightmare seems to develop and take another twist. Or else he would see a room in a rich house where his friend lay asleep, dreaming and smiling at his dreams. And then the door of that room would be opened, the curtains of the bed plucked apart, the sleeper recalled, and lo, there would stand by his side a figure to whom power was given, and even at that dead hour he must rise and do its bidding. The figure in these two phases haunted the lawyer all night, and if at any time he dozed over, it was but to see it glide more stealthily through sleeping houses, or move the more swiftly and still the more swiftly, even to dizziness, through wider labyrinths of lamp-lighted city, and at every street corner crush a child and leave her screaming. Now this really is a description of a nightmare. You see this character that's moving stealthily and fearfully throughout his dreams. Utterson almost seems to be dizzy through the horror of seeing this dream replaying and replaying, and he's feeling haunted by this figure at night. But also, he seems to be connecting this horror to his good friend Dr. Jekyll, who we see described as quite an innocent figure just laying asleep, and who's being invaded by this evil force, who seems to be able to have the power to make him rise and do his bidding at will. So Mr. Utterson is clearly in a state of distress that's seeping into his subconscious thoughts. And still the figure had no face by which he might know it. Even in his dreams it had no face, or one that baffled him and melted before his eyes. And thus it was that there sprang up and grew apace in the lawyer's mind a singularly strong, almost an inordinate curiosity to behold the features of the real Mr. Hyde. If he could but once set eyes on him, he thought, the mystery would lighten and perhaps roll away altogether, as was the habit of mysterious things when well examined. The idea that the face of his dreams is one that he can't see. It has no face. It's a face that melts before his very eyes because he's never seen the real Mr. Hyde, makes the character more mysterious and more terrifying. And it kind of ignites in Utterson this curiosity and this desire to see Mr. Hyde for himself. And this is something that's really important to our story because Utterson's curiosity here is something that's going to allow us also to get to the bottom of this mystery. He might see a reason for his friend's strange preference, or bondage, call it which you please, and even for the startling clause of the will. At least it would be a face worth seeing, the face of a man who was without bowels of mercy, a face which had but to show itself to raise up in the mind of the unimpressionable Enfield a spirit of enduring hatred. Again, his curiosity is to find out what on earth does Hyde have over his friend, what causes him to have his friend in a state of bondage or enslavement almost to him. Why is the will something that Jekyll would write? Why would Jekyll leave everything to this man? But also this face is a face of horror. It's a face that inspires horror and hatred in others. And it's a face that seems to disguise someone who has absolutely no mercy, who shows no remorse. And so Utterson is utterly determined to see who this man actually is. From that time forward, Mr. Utterson began to haunt the door in the by-street of shops. In the morning before office hours, at noon when business was plenty and time scarce, at night under the face of the fogged city moon, by all lights and at all hours of solitude or concourse, the lawyer was to be found on his chosen post. If he be Mr. Hyde, he had thought, I shall be Mr. Seek. And there we see that the dream sort of seems to lead him into this absolute determination to track Hyde down, to actually seek him out. And if you see there the idea that at first Mr. Hyde was haunting his dreams, but now Utterson seems to be one doing the haunting. He's haunting the doors of all the shops, looking out for this man. As a Victorian novelist, clearly might have some tricky vocabulary. Hitherto just means before. Juggernaut is that metaphor used to describe Hyde, and it just means an unstoppable or powerful force. Labyrinth is a maze, and London, the streets have become a maze of confusion to the normally very rational and orderly Utterson. Again, Utterson is a man that's very used to working out problems. He's a lawyer, he's a very rational person, but he's in a state of bafflement. He's baffled, he's confused. Inordinate, unusually large or excessive. Bondage, this is the key word because this seems to be what Utterson fears has happened to his friend. He feels that he's enslaved, owned or dominated by Hyde, and he needs to know why. Solitude is the state of being alone, and this probably makes Utterson's fears even more intense and frightening. The context of dreams and nightmares. They're very typical of the Gothic genre. They add a sense of mystery and fear. They describe the things that we cannot control. We can control our rational state of mind, the things that we think of in our normal daily waking state. But when we sleep, our irrational or our subconscious mind comes alive. And it's in this state that we tend to explore the fears, the horrors, the nightmares of our world. And these are the things we can't control so well. Actually, it's this state of stepping from the rational into the irrational that allows the Gothic to take pace and allows us to step across that boundary into the idea of the supernatural and the things that lay beyond the normal world. Stevenson has claimed that the idea of the story came to him in a dream, so that might be why he's brought this dream into his story, and there's a link there for you to follow if you want to pursue that idea a little bit further. Question 1. How does Stevenson capture Utterson's fears? Well, he does this through his use of language and imagery. You notice in the description it says he's digging away at the problem. That metaphor suggests that he just cannot let it go. It also shows that his imagination was engaged or rather enslaved. He seems to be metaphorically completely controlled by this fear and he can't let it go. He can't escape it. We have this image of the tale going before his mind in a scroll of lighted pictures. It feels as if the usually rational, logical way of thinking about a problem has affected him now in a different way. The images of this man or creature are now taking over his imagination, the part of his brain that is less within his control. As I've said, the metaphor enslaved reinforces this idea that he has no power over how it dominates his thoughts. It's in control of him, an unusual situation for a lawyer to be in. We also see the idea that Utterson's being haunted in almost a filmic way. It's as if this story is just playing out in vivid images throughout his mind. In the darkness of the curtained room. So he can't shake it off and it's been burned into him and he needs to kind of seek a solution to this problem. What is disturbing Utterson's dreams? The human juggernaut is described several times and this idea of this unstoppable force that shows no mercy or remorse as it tramples the child clearly contributes to Utterson's sense of fear. The idea that he's being haunted shows that he's seriously disturbed by what he has heard. And the images of the troubled girl are replaying through his nightmares, an idea repeated later in the extract. Stevenson also describes the wider labyrinths of lamp-lighted city. London at night becomes a sinister and inescapable place, like a maze he cannot navigate. It creates again that sense of mystery and fear in the setting. And even more frightening in some ways is that it had no face by which he might know it. Even in his dreams it had no face, or one that baffled him and melted before his eyes. We fear what we do not know, and again here we see Utterson unable to make out the features of this terrifying figure. It's even described as melting, which is a very gothic and supernatural sort of idea. The face of a man who is without bowels of mercy. This is an absolutely remorseless character, somebody who would be terrifying to meet because they haven't got the usual guilt or remorse that stops us and controls us in society. The whole thing is very frightening, but as you see, Stephen tries to end up on a bit of a joke here. If he be Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek. And I actually think this is the best line in the whole novella. Mr. Hyde's name, Hyde, get it, has obvious connotations of mystery and secrecy. But at the end of this extract, Utterson reveals his resolve, despite his fears, to unravel the mystery and get to the bottom of who this strange man is. He's going to be Mr. Seek. Now, his role as our seeker, as our person who's going to discover the truth, is really important in our story, because without him doing that, we would never be able to solve the